Welcome. I'm Matthew Phelps, co-author of the Turning to God's Word Bible study, The United Kingdom of Israel, Foreshadowing the Reign of Christ the King. Today we'll be talking about Lesson 20 of our Bible study, which covers the second book of Samuel, chapter 19, verse 41, through chapter 21, verse 22. So, David has been reinstated as king, first by Israel, then by Judah. And that leads to a little bit of dispute here, which for once doesn't directly involve the king. It is between the people of Judah specifically and the people of Israel. A dispute which will continue for a very long time to come. But here we go, and they both have a point. David has gone back to Jerusalem in the land of Judah to be king, and the people of Israel are a little annoyed that the king is in Judah, especially when the Judahites were slower to acknowledge him as king than they were. They kind of thought they might get a little bit of an advantage in this one. Never mind the fact that they were pretty much all involved in the rebellion. They're trying to forget that part. And just come in with, but we came back first, so we deserve more. Which seems to be the thrust of their argument. Also, at the heart of this is an idea of who is the king in terms of tribal association. Because the counterpoint of the tribe of Judah is David is nearer in kin to us, so we get more of him because he is from us. And again, the counterpoint to that from the Israelites is he's king of all of us, and we have more shares in him than you do, which is... Both sides of that argument are very interesting, and it tells us a lot about what the kingship is and means, how it ends up being answered. Here it's only settled by the people of the tribe of Judah have fiercer words, and so they win for now. But that does not and will not ultimately solve and resolve this question of to whom does the king belong? And we'll see that question persists as we continue to talk about what the kingship is in Israel and in Judah in this study and to come. And it is an important foundational concept. But here, based on fiercer words, we decide nearer kinship qualifies more as an important talking point about the king than he's shared equally by all the tribes like the land is. So the tribe the king comes from matters. So as this dispute is raging on, Sheba, a guy who is described here as being a worthless fellow and does everything he can to prove it, raises the point of the king isn't acknowledging Israel. They don't have a share in the king, and attempts to get the tribes of Israel to break off and to side with him against David and the tribe of Judah, capitalizing on their hard feelings about the kingship being centered and powered primarily in Judah. Feelings which again will only continue to grow. The thing that is odd about that is that Sheba happens to be of which tribe? The tribe of Benjamin, which is the only other tribe to have had a king, and when they did, they weren't in any more mood to share than David is. So the precedent really is not behind him that he's going to be really happy to share equal parts of the kingship he hopes to wrest from David with all of the tribes of Israel. But most importantly, here 2 points. One, a new rebellion has arisen, and two, tensions exist now that will last permanently between the tribe of Judah and the tribes of Israel over who the king belongs to, especially now that we know God has promised that the king will always belong to Judah. And you can probably imagine some of the tribes of Israel are going to be a little sore about that if that always means as the precedent is developing now, that the king does belong primarily to Judah and secondarily to Israel. That's going to create a problem that will persist and can expand as time progresses. So, if you remember, part of David's political maneuvering to get Judah all the way back on his side, who are now so adamantly saying, yeah, David is our king, we like him, and not, we barely took him back and we couldn't get over ourselves very quickly, but who are now so all in on that. Part of what David did to get everyone from Judah back on his side is he appointed Amasa general in place of Joab. So now there's a new rebellion arising, time to get the army involved again. David commands Amasa to gather the army, and Amasa deliberately delays. So, when he misses his deadline, David falls back on old favorites, not Joab. It is really starting to look like Joab may have potentially lost some favor with the killing of Absalom, but rather Abishai, relative of Joab, and another guy who has been a general in David's armies and a commander for a long time, and says, okay, Amasa didn't get this done, I need you to go take care of this, and Joab goes with him. And so off they go to go deal with the Sheba guy, and as they're going, since the army is moving, after all, Amasa shows up, ready to, he seems, and this is fitting of someone who was just leading a traitor army, does not seem very enthused about the idea of David winning. He could even be going to the extent of going out to sabotage the army in a leadership role. But he's showing up, and arguably he still has the right to be general if he shows up. So he comes out, shows up, Joab goes to greet him and say, hey, how are you? Welcome, and all of that. And then instead of saying welcome, he stabs him to death. Joab seems to not want to put up with someone who is going to incompetently lead David's troops. And also lead a rebellion and all the, you can see why Joab doesn't much care, and usurp Joab's place. Joab has a lot of reasons not to like this guy. And rather than sit around and talk about it, he decides to just deal with it, which admittedly is what Joab does. So, Joab has killed Amasa. So, Joab has just killed Amasa, and then there's a little bit of a problem that arises, but nothing that is outside of Joab's ability to troubleshoot. Everybody is then, again, in the army, ready to just go back to following Joab, which they're used to anyway, and more comfortable with. But as they're all walking by, they see the disemboweled corpse of their former general, if only briefly former, and it's causing everybody to pause just a little bit and ask a few questions that are really not conducive to let's go kill Sheba. So Joab, being the wise commander he is, notices it and says, let's throw him in the field and cover him up, and then they won't see him and we'll be fine. And surprise, surprise, they do, and they're fine, and nobody seems to have an issue with it after that. So off they go to Beth Maacah, where Sheba is hiding out. David had said, you know, it could be a problem for us if they take any cities, which is why we need to be fast. And now he is camped out in a city, so they have to besiege this city, which they do by building a huge dirt ramp up to the walls, and they are getting ready for a long siege, and to once again find somebody who is falsely claiming political authority to see to his death. Sheba is hiding in a city. Joab is besieging the city. Here we see in how this plays out that Sheba really not so bright and not so good at rebellion. Remember, Absalom plotted his rebellion for 4 years of development and probably at least 2 years of seething and plotting before that, to have the support and the infrastructure and everything he needed to have a decent chance. And Sheba just kind of stirred up some people in the middle of a bad spot and thought he had everything he needed, and then ran off to a city where, as it turns out, he doesn't know the people that well or have the allegiance of the people inside the city that well, because a wise old woman from the city comes out and asks to speak to Joab and says, this city is an important part of our heritage, and we would really prefer it if you not destroy it. What can we do? And Joab says, well, I don't want to destroy the city. I just want to kill Sheba. And she says, wait right there. We'll be right back. And they throw Sheba's head over the wall, and Joab, true to his word, takes off. And the city is fine. So Sheba fled to a place where he did not have the kind of support that he really would need to guarantee his protection against the forces of David. And that's what happens when you don't take the time to get all of your ducks in a row before you rebel against the king. This one was pretty easy. So, now David is king again, and it's worth reestablishing his cabinet. So, Joab, once again, is in charge of the military, which he's had some problems, but let's be honest, that's worked out really well for David. And why ultimately would you mess with a good thing? Especially when you try something else and it starts going very badly, and then Joab saves your butt again. So, that seems like it's probably as it should be. There are also a couple other interesting changes from the last time we saw this list a number of lessons ago. Now we have someone in charge of forced labor. As the kingship, the kingdom, and the infrastructure are growing, that has become something that is more prevalent. And even more interesting and important than that is an absence, which is specifically that David's sons are no longer listed as priests. Whether it be that, a couple of his sons are dead, and he decided through various ill behavior on their part that wasn't really a thing he wanted, or he figured out that he didn't have the power to name priests who are not Levites, which is also accurate, or any other number of other reasons, they're no longer being listed, which gets us back to the priesthood is made up of people of the tribe of Levi. So now David can get back to matters of administration. And one of the things that has come up is there's been a famine in the land for 3 years. So David goes to ask God what's going on. And God says that it's on account of the Gibeonites. So David goes to talk to the Gibeonites about what they need to get everybody swear. And they have a fairly radical suggestion. They don't want land or money. They want something else. And it's related to the whole situation of what happened and how this came about when Joshua and the people were entering the Holy Land. The Gibeonites tricked them into making a deal with them where they wouldn't kill them. The people entered the deal without talking to God, but God seemed to always like the idea that they needed to be bound by it once they made it, and that was the Gibeonites would enter into slavery to the Israelites but not be killed. And that land eventually ended up being in the land of Benjamin when the tribes were apportioned. And that was sort of just a standing arrangement. And then Saul, from the area of Benjamin, became king, and in something that wasn't really mentioned before now, but we hear he had done, he decided to murder a bunch of Gibeonites, presumably because he wanted to free up the land and felt like he could as king. Once again, who needs to honor the deals of our ancestors? I'm the king. I can do whatever I want. And so on Saul and his household is the blood of the Gibeonites who were put to death against a deal made by the ancestors of all the people. And it turns out God doesn't really like that. And so what can be paid back in retribution, what the Gibeonites ask for are 7 descendants of Saul that they can put to death. So here David is kind of stuck. He's the people are paying for sins of Saul, and he really, being king, is responsible for resolving this famine and this issue if God has told him how. And the only way that he can is to put to death a bunch of children of Saul. But he also has this one guy, grandson of Saul, that he has promised to spare, Mephibosheth. So he's off the table. So now we've got to find, there aren't so many descendants of Saul left. We've got to find 7 others that we can give to the Gibeonites to put to death. So he has to dig kind of deep, but he does find 7 other descendants of Saul, and he hands them over, and they're hanged. David reluctantly, but of necessity it seems in his situation, had to hand over 7 descendants of Saul to the Gibeonites to be killed. And now I see the mother of some of the children, Rizpah, mourning over the death of her children, a thing that David certainly can relate to here and in this present time. And he sees it and he feels bad. And so he does something. Normally the bodies of these people would not have been buried, but he feels bad, and he feels bad retroactively to Saul and Jonathan as well. So he goes and gets the bones of Saul and of Jonathan and of all of the 7 that he gave over, and he allows them to be buried in their family tomb. And it's at that point that we see that God relents of the famine and that God considers everything even. Not at the point that the children are killed, but at the point that David has also restored to the family tomb Saul and Jonathan and those 7. So God seems to have viewed there as being some injustice on a couple different sides there. And David, through everything that he did, managed to right it all enough that God relented of the famine. And now in what is a list that goes on for a while, it can be really very easily summed up as people attack and we win. And some of them are descended from giants, which is mostly the Old Testament way of saying they were extremely impressive individuals. And like they had bigger and stronger guys than we did, but we're Israelites and we won anyway because we are the superior people and God is on our side. And it's also worth noting God is making good on his idea of the sword will never depart from your house. David had a fairly decent period of peace there, or relative peace, before he committed, at least not being attacked. I mean, people went out during like the battle season just to keep the army busy, but it didn't seem like it was really very threatening, and it was mostly aggressive on the part of Israel. Now they seem like they're being attacked fairly often by the people around them who either sense weakness and think maybe they can get some advantage, or they're just in that mood, or they have these huge guys that they think can give them an advantage or whatever. But we're seeing that the sword is not departing from the house of David, and there are all of these battles. And the Israelites are winning. This has been an overview of Lesson 20 of the Turning to God's Word Bible Study, The United Kingdom of Israel, Foreshadowing the Reign of Christ the King. For more information, consult our written study and visit us online at turningtogodsword.com.